my pen. You took my pen. Vamos, listo? It's a little noisy. It would be the first sound you hear out of my mouth is a little noisy. So.
Can we hear ourselves? No.
Yeah, more or less.
All right.
I think I hear my heartbeat.
No, it's the air conditioning.
Okay. And my lungs.
These lights are so strong. Okay. Thanks for coming by.
For those of you who don't know, this is Christian Marclay.
This is Nick Collins.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can you hear us well?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I'll start. All right. I'll break the ice.
Okay.
I'm here because I've known Christian for a long, long time. And for Sónar, he sort of has a foot in each of the two kind of stylistic camps he has camped out in. And one is what we might call music, and one is what we might call art. And my relationship with Christian goes back during the days when he was invisible as a visual artist, but very, very audible as an artist working with sound in what might, I think, generically be called a DJ mode. There he is. And so what I thought, given the context of the brilliant show that's up at the museum at the moment, more bass. The brilliant show, the brilliant show that's up at the museum at the moment.
At Marclay, yeah, I really should go and see it.
And the performance he's doing tomorrow night of Untitled. What's the name of the piece? Your piano
piece.
Investigations, excuse me. That I try to get our conversation centered on the similarities and differences in working with sound and working with visual material. Okay? So,
by the way, this photo was taken in Barcelona. When was that? 1985, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. At Metronome, which was a new music venue. I can't believe you hear us, because I just hear this like big noise on stage.
I know.
Like we're under the subway.
I've played under the subway, I think. I think you have too.
So the difference between the visual and the sonic.
Yeah. All right, so for starters, when I worked with you in the early 80s, it was largely in the context of what we might call improvised music. You were a DJ, but you were not working in, say, a rhythm-driven music form that put any kind of constraints on your material, your technique. And as a result, both of those were developed quite extremely. I mean, look at the surface you're playing on.
Actually, I have a drumstick there, though I'm not making a dance beat.
It's a good point.
But I was hitting the turntable. These were Lenko, these Swiss turntables that have a metal platter, and it would ring beautifully. Sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah, but it was made in a context of improvisation.
Yeah.
And So it was very much about responding to each other, and we used to play together sometimes.
Right. And I think that, I mean, there's hours of things one can say about the nature of the turntable as an instrument and everything else, but I'm thinking primarily just about the way you make decisions when you improvise versus the way you make decisions when you, say, make the clock, which I'm assuming everybody knows, if not by experience, by reputation, which is that improvisation, you have no opportunity to edit after the fact. You know, in other words, once you make a gesture, once you make a sound, it's there, right? And I think the clock is a tour de force of editorial control. In other words, that to me does not come off like an improvised work. It comes out off as something that's been very meticulously planned. So how do you sort of negotiate the space between those two extremes in your behavior?
Well, music allows me to stay sane. It's very liberating, and I think I came to music when I was in art school studying visual arts. But for me, discovering improvisation was a way to express myself there and then, on the moment, responding to others, and I felt this was very liberating. And it was at a time when a lot of visual artists or students were getting involved in music. So punk rock was also this very liberating moment when you didn't have to know how to play a guitar. You just did it. You just booked a gig in a club and you just had to come up with solutions. And I felt like that risk-taking, that possibility of creating something in the moment was liberating for me. And that's why I think I kind of gravitated towards that world. And when I was studying sculpture at the Massachusetts College of Art in Boston, they kicked me out of the sculpture department because I was making performances, and the only sculptural objects that I was making at the time were records. So anyway, I got kicked out of the sculpture department and got involved with performance. I've always felt like I was an artist. It didn't have to be a musician or a visual artist. I didn't make that distinction. For me, it was important to be creative. Sound is just another medium, and I've always worked with the idea of collage and found material. So records were cheap and easy to find. I grew up in Europe, but going to the US, I would often go to thrift stores, Salvation Army, and I could buy records for 10 cents, records that nobody wanted, Christmas records, easy listening, and often they were damaged. Mm. And being able to work with this material, which was an incredible history of sound, and it was there available cheaply available, and I really kind of explore that as just another medium. So the scratches became very important as the sound recorded in the groove. Maybe I could play a little excerpt. This is a Anyway, just to give you a taste of what the sound of vinyl is like, and it's not just about the sound recorded in a groove. What did I just do here? There you go. So the records are very physical, very sculptural objects in a way. It is sort of a grooved surface that I could cut and paste. I don't think I have any of these sample of these records. Oh, here. So I would cut these records and glue them back together and play them. And sometimes I would use picture discs, and they got quite intricate. But these would give you a rhythm just by the nature of the spinning disc. And the sound of the crack became a rhythm. So every damage became potentially musical sounds.
In one of the interviews I read with you, I think it was one with Doug Kahn, you spoke about how the very first DJ work you did, you were using the records just because they had a skip, and that the skip became, as it were, the rhythm machine for the band. In other words, it was a duo project of yours, and you used that as the beat, okay? And as long as I've known you, that notion of the damage to the record, the skip that is naturally occurring as a result of it being damaged, or that you've created by putting a sticker on it, or putting slices together like this, is as important as the content. In fact, sometimes it's more important than the content. Your record without a cover begins just with surface noise before you hear any kind of identifiable signal. And I wonder if it leads to a way of organizing sound that the word DJ doesn't give sufficient justice to, because I've had the impression that when you pick records, you go for very generic sound material rather than identifiable things. It's not like a lot of dance music where the legacy of a particular sample is known as it's important, and that your choices are much more about those physical properties that don't carry as much kind of cultural weight.
Well, I used both. I also like sometimes to sample something that is recognizable. So there's an identification from the audience. They recognize the material. And I think I use that a lot in my video also. And I think part of the success of some of my video work is because people know where this material came from. There's no trick or magic trick. It's really material that we all share, that we have in common. All these records, all these movies that we've seen, these actors that we're familiar with, allows the audience to identify with the material. It's not abstract. I've always been. That's why I work with collage, because I love the idea of being able to do something with a material that everybody knows, that has a connection, a cultural connection to all of us. So that the fact that it's recognizable is interesting to me. But very often what happens is that after a concert, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, I recognize that piece. You played this piece by so-and-so." And I said, "No, I don't. I've never owned that record."
Yeah.
So people start projecting and hearing things because it is using a material that potentially could be that. People start recognizing things. I think that's an interesting moment when people imagine things.
At the same time, I was just talking with a guy a couple of nights ago who runs a film studies program at a large American university. And he was talking about the clock in terms that I'd never thought of before. having to do with all of the kind of film theory backstory that gets interrupted by the way you make your edits. And I realized that if you go too deep in that, down that line of trying to trace the source material, you lose the attention to some of the other aspects of the work. I mean, the way that you edit your work is very different from the way film gets edited in terms of how you work with continuity and how you work with convention. So, I mean, do you ever find yourself in a struggle between that sort of shift of attention between recognizing source material and looking at it for what it is, or doesn't that bother you?
No, I think you have to let the audience read into what you're doing as they want. I mean, I think that's very important, to allow that kind of openness. But maybe to go back to the question, your first question is, that difference between improvisation and doing something very precise like editing video or editing sound in the studio rather than live in front of an audience. In front of an audience, everything is part of it. Mistakes, everything becomes part of it. And you have to accept that, and you have to play with it. So every time you make a mistake, you have to agree with it and be able to listen to it, not as a mistake, but as a new starting point. When you're editing under control, then everything is possible. It's limitless. And what you decide to put in that video or on that recording, however you want to manipulate it, becomes really intentional. And that intention, and the audience reads it as intentional. When you show the process, there's room for mistakes, and there's an understanding from the audience that you're really improvising, and that maybe you made a mistake, but they saw the struggle that you went through, and they can accept that mistake because there is a struggle that is visible. We're struggling as musicians. When you're performing in a group situation, a mistake is maybe a genius moment for someone else that you're performing with. So that distinction doesn't exist anymore.
Right. There's a beautiful line of Jasper Johns where in one interview someone asked him about the role of accidents in his paintings, and they were referring to a paint drip on one canvas. And he said, there are no accidents in my paintings. If the paint drips, I have the freedom to either undo it or to put it in, but it's not an accident when the painting's finished. And I think that's a very beautiful and powerful aspect of painting, is that you kind of walk right on that line between improvisation and editing, because you do have that little bit of a do-over, and yet it retains so much gesture that you can feel a little closer to the improvisation.
Well, it's the same thing with music, I think.
Well, as you say, you can either build on the mistake or try to pretend it didn't happen.
I mean, a mistake is relative, as long as it doesn't threaten someone's life.
Right.
It is a benign mistake. Is actually something that should be encouraged. I mean, this project is all about mistakes. It's called Footsteps, and it's from 1989. I made this record. It's a one-sided record, and on it, actually, you don't know what's on it when you visited the exhibition, which happened to be the Shed-Halle in Zurich. You would walk through these records, and the only clue you had was on the label. It said footsteps, and it had my name, and that was it. Only when, at the end of the exhibition, after people walked on this surface and the records got damaged, then the record was lifted, packaged, and sold in a box with a poster of this image. So every one of these records was a unique recording. It contained the recording of my footsteps, me walking through my studio, and I mixed in a little bit of tap dancing from a friend who was a tap dancer, and that's it. When you listen to it, it's all scratched up, and if you imagine the kind of rhythms that the scratches would produce, they're very similar to the sound, the rhythm of a footsteps. And then this chance mix between the actual scratches and the recording of the footsteps made it, every record a unique recording. So I've always been fighting this idea of the record. I love records, but I also have this love-hate relationship with them because they're killing live music in a way. I'm always been attracted to live music. The record kind of seals it and it becomes permanent. So that's when the scratch becomes a disaster, and you scratch your record and it's ruined. My records, you can scratch them. They always sound better.
I play this one for my students. I teach in an art school, and when they get this piece, it's just like an entire seminar in critical theory in 4 seconds. It's terrific, in terms of what is the footstep, what is the real, what is the unreal. And my particular example of this has a perfect impression of a Tyrolean boot on it. So it's like the most Swiss concept they can imagine, that they can see a footstep and they can hear a footstep. I also, everything changes with the advent of digital media, but I remember growing up, this quality of the record being personalized by the particular scratches on your copy versus someone else's, that my copy of a particular song, there would be a tick in the middle of the guitar solo, and my friend's copy had it in the chorus, and somehow we could always tell which one was which, even though in theory they were identical.
So, I mean, that's, this is really embracing the accident as much as record without a cover.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't explain this, but this was my first ever recording, the first record I produced in 1985, and it was called Record Without a Cover, and it came like that. No cover, no sleeve, nothing, in a record shop. In those days, music existed only on vinyl. There were cassettes. So people were very particular about their records and held them in a certain way. And this was a problem for store managers because they didn't know what to do with this. There was no protection. Some people actually put it in sleeves because they felt like it had to be protected. The content on the other side, on this side is an embossing on the surface of the record that tells you do not store this record in a protective packaging. On the other side, you had a recording of a mix I did with scratchy records. So already you didn't know if, when the sound was looping, skipping, if that was a recorded skip or if that was a skip that happened because the record got damaged. So this confusion between the recorded and the real, between the illusion of what's in the groove and the actual physical damage on the record, created this real nice tension, and also not knowing what the final mix was, what the original mix was. I was very influenced by hip-hop music at the time. We'd created EPs that had one side with a mix, and on the B side, you would have different tracks from that recording, just the drum parts or just the vocals, a cappella. And the intention of this record is you needed to have two of them, and the DJs would mix them and extend the composition as long as they wanted, changes as they wanted it. So for me, that was a crucial moment when suddenly the idea of the record was not about a document of an absolute composition, but it was a tool to create your own composition, to make it as long as or as short, or add even other tracks to it. And for me, that was a really revolutionary moment in recording.
I agree. It kind of acknowledged the fact that there was this whole secondary market for a record, which wasn't as a final product. Yeah? I have this book about the sort of history of audio culture that talks about how in the early days of gramophones, acoustic gramophones, they came with instructions and little cards that you would mail out to your neighbors when you were going to hold a gramophone concert. And you were told, you shouldn't play the music in the background. You should make sure everyone is sitting and being quiet, and then you should explain the piece before you play it. And it was that just like wonderful notion that you were supposed to invest in the record as a performance medium. And then that kind of disappeared for 30 or 40 years. And then I think that it took hip-hop to acknowledge it, as you say, with those B-side breakouts, what all DJs had been doing since at least the sort of late 60s discotheques, but it just made it easier. I remember Record Without a Cover, we were on tour once in Europe, and we were in Switzerland. It may have been in Geneva, it may have been in Zurich, and we were at the home of a collector, a music collector, and a fan of yours in particular. And we had a beautiful dinner. I think he made his own absinthe, which was scary for a New Yorker. That was scary. And then he took us into his vault, and his vault, instead of having fine Swiss wines, had his record collection. It was temperature controlled. And he comes to one section, he says, "Here, Mr. Sharp, here are all of your records." And there were Elliot's records. "Here, Mr. Collins, here's your record." And there's like one record. And then, "Here, Christian," first name, "here are your records." And Christian flips through and finds this in a protective plastic sleeve. So he takes the sleeve off and he throws the record across the floor of the concrete cellar. The guy freaked out, but I think he accepted the fact that he hadn't read the instructions on the disc. I don't know if you ever spoke to him again after that, but it was a great moment.
Maybe he didn't speak English, so...
No, he was good enough to know what was going on. What are you looking for?
No, I'm just... thinking of the record as a tool, as an instrument.
Yeah.
And I would annotate my records, put stickers, so I could quickly, in the performance, find the spots that I needed, quickly get to it. So in some cases, I forgot what the record was because it got covered with so many labels, and for me that wasn't important. Who the composer was or what. It's just that I got it cheaply somewhere. But I was interested in that bell sound or that piano sound. I was interested in that little break, that moment. Or I would put the sticker specifically in a spot where I know I could get a nice loop. So it was really about using the record as an instrument. So when people said I played with turntables, I said, well, turntables and records, because the records were as much my instrument as the record, as the turntable.
you know, again, it brings me back to this sort of an inability to see where the kind of center of your attention lies between kind of the material itself and the mechanism by which you manipulate it. And one thought that's been on my mind, looking at your recent work of, say, the last 5 years, is you've become deeply invested in video as a format. That is, some type of moving image that you can edit and control and display in a variety of different ways. And what it made me think about was, at the point that you kind of left working with visual art and started doing your DJ work, do you think that if video had been a friendlier medium in those days, because working with video, editing video, was not easy, yeah, would it have attracted you, or did you have to come to video through the path that you took through sound and say, the visual collages you were doing in the early 90s?
Well, I think I would have probably, my approach to mixing sound has very much influenced my approach to mixing visual images. The thing about video is that it is sound and image as one. And when you edit it, you edit sound as much as image. But I think, pieces like telephones or the clock really grew out of this practice of DJing, and a certain lack of respect for the found material. The same way that I was never really a record collector and obsessing about certain artists or certain types of music, that I was kind of collecting things as much for the record covers as for the content, and that whatever I found that was cheap. In the end, I have a large record collection, but it is. It is about the object, which has a visual and an image. When I work with video, I'm also, I don't have the kind of respect and admiration that I should maybe have for all these movies that I'm cutting up and transforming. I always think that I'm a little bit of an outsider. If you get too involved in something as a fan, as a collector, then you're paralyzed in front of this material and you can't do anything. You don't want to mess up with it. And for me, having that distance allows me to be free and damaging to the original.
In one of the interviews I read, you said you're not a collector, you're an accumulator. And I think that's a nice way to look at the distinction.
Well, I still think there's a collector in me, which I always tried to fight. And now the only things that I collect are things that I can justify using in my work. So I only collect things if I'm going to use them in my work. I don't think I don't want to amass too many things around me anymore. And I don't know if that's the result of living in a digital world where everything fits on these things and we don't need to be surrounded with so many objects. But of course there is that contradiction in me, because I do love these objects as well. So there you go. It's a conundrum. But I think
we've run over. We now have to.
You have to do the talking now.
This is our EU mandated question and answer period.
Yeah, here's someone. Oh, is there a microphone for the young lady here?
Or shall I go down and lean in with mine? That would be a little weird. No, Mike?
There's the mic coming.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry, we should have given you more sound check time.
Yeah,
Young lady over there, young woman over there.
Thank you. I'm a
Right.
massive fan of both of you. So, do you listen to music, and in what sort of form? Since you're breaking all your records.
I don't listen to that much music, actually. And if I listen to it, it's digital these days because I live sort of... I don't have my record collection with me. I'm kind of in transit too often. We were talking last night about subwoofers. All I hear is this bass, right? Which is a new phenomenon. And you had a great explanation for it, which I didn't really think about it like that. It's like before we used to have speakers that had everything built into the speaker, the highs and the lows. Now you have a subwoofer that maybe is right under the stage and is servicing everything. And it's such an unnatural sound that I can't get used to it. So when I hear live music these days, I run away because I just can't stand that bass. But that's just a personal thing. But it's interesting how in 30 years, sound systems have evolved so much. We're not listening the same way, and we're not hearing the same thing.
I go out to hear a lot of live music. I don't listen to much music off of recordings. Part of the reason is I can't do anything else while I have music on. It's like one or the other. I can't write or think. But I listen to music a lot when I cook. And my family suffers from having too much audio equipment. So we have a complete separate audio set up in our kitchen with vinyl, cassette, CD, and whatever streaming doodad we have. And I'm actually working on an LP cookbook where you match recipes to vinyl with the idea that no recipe takes more than 2 sides of vinyl to get from prep to finish. It's like the modern yuppie cookbook. If you figure a typical album side is 15 to 18 minutes to prep and chop, 15 to 18 minutes to cook. And the thing I love about vinyl is you don't have to listen to the B-side, whereas on a CD it just keeps playing, right? So you get these odd juxtapositions of one record for chopping and one record for cooking.
While you're waiting for the water to boil, you can flip the record.
Exactly. So
the rhythmic song is for the chopping.
You would think so, but I'm not a very good chopper, and I'll probably hit my finger if I try to beat match. That's the problem. I'm not a techno cook. Does that answer? That's more than you wanted to know, I know. Anyone else?
But we need to plug Nick's book also.
No, we don't. We don't.
Which is his Bible on hacking. What is it called?
It's called, I feel like I'm on the Johnny Carson show. This is called Handmade Electronic Music, The Art of Hardware Hacking. But at the risk of alienating my editor, don't buy it for the next 6 months because I'm working on a new edition, which will have lots of contributions from hackers all over the world, so it will be more global in perspective. Big contribution from El Cono Sur. So, but you could come to the workshop I'm doing tomorrow afternoon in hacking, which is somewhere around here at 1 o'clock. There, I've done it. No other questions? Then we may be the, oh.
Yeah, Jean-Pierre.
Hi, you mentioned, you hear me?
Yes.
You mentioned the importance of hip-hop for you, and I was wondering suddenly if you were aware at the time of what they did with records in Jamaica. You know, the dub systems, people like Lee Scratch Perry, he wasn't called Scratch for nothing, and I think they started the whole scratching thing and collage before hip-hop in the preceding decade, actually, in the previous decade. Were you aware of that at the time?
No, I wasn't, but what I was aware of is John Cage, is musique concrète in France. There's a whole history of, the minute that people invented a way to record sound, right away people started messing around with it, and including prior to musique concrète. So I had this more kind of modernist knowledge of records being used as creative tools. And living in New York in the 80s, I discovered hip-hop. But hip-hop was mainly a dance. It was a dance movement, so it was all about how to make people dance in a club. That was the purpose of this. And if you like that song, you can make it last forever. So it was really about making dance, making DJs able to make people dance in a live kind of real way instead of the passive play of a record. The old DJ just played a tune and then transitioned to the next one, but this was really hands-on. And so I had this experience in New York, but the first time I saw a DJ live, it was Grandmaster Flash, and he was using a drum machine, and I thought, oh, he's just cheating. I thought it was cheating. I liked the purist approach to just using records, but it was incredible what they were able to do. But the Jamaican music, I wasn't, aware of it at the time, and it wasn't an influence. But I came to using records before hip-hop, before I knew what hip-hop was. And a friend of mine said, oh, you should go and check out Grandmaster Flash. So I did, but there was also very much a divide in Manhattan. If you were in the Bronx, you were aware of certain things. If you lived in the lower Manhattan, it was a different world, and there was a real different, not only of style, but I tried to collaborate with some of the hip hop dancers, but you remember John Zorn invited one of DJs to come. It was Red Alert, and he came in the recording studio, did a thing, and then he just dissed the whole thing and said, you couldn't even dance to the stuff. And he said that in an interview, and Zorn used that as the tag on the record to advertise it. I think
that's it. We can't dance anymore, Christian. We're being hooked.
Yeah. No, actually, I just thought of that just for 1 second, because since you mentioned punk rock, I mean, there was just one kind of music that punks could stand, apart from the music they were doing, and it was reggae. That was the only music they could stand. So there might be a connection between the dub systems in Kingston, Jamaica, and the de-skilling of punk rock. I mean, I see some sort of connection maybe here.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
All right. And remember, dance responsibly tonight.